Hello everyone, Father Jared Cohn, pastor of St. Joseph Pillar Families here in Shelby County, Ohio, coming to you with part 3 and just a little Beacons Explainer. So first part was why, so kind of giving the why. Second one was process of getting to the end state. And then third is just like what exactly does canonical unity mean? So what does that look like? So first, we're going to look at merger versus amalgamation. What's the difference between those two? What are we thinking here in St. Joe Pillar Families currently? And then number 2 is going to be just addressing, why canonical unity over just remaining as a family of parishes. And then number 3 is going to be parochial versus subsidiary church. What does that mean? And then number 4 is going to be finances. So what does that look like with canonical unity and creating one juridical person from the current 4? So looking at all those things. So first, merger versus amalgamation. So merger is bringing ultimately together existing parishes into a new existing reality, juridic person. So, so parish A, B, and C all are merged into a new entity, parish D. So they're creating a new unity there, a new entity, and so that's what a merger is. So amalgamation would be there's parishes A, B, and C, and parish A and C will then be subsumed into parish B, would be amalgamation. So what are we thinking currently, or what are the thoughts on, ultimately a merger versus amalgamation in our situation? Well, given that we have 4 thriving churches, and it seems to make more sense at this moment to have a merger. And the reason for that is because then we are able to bring the best all into a new one. Pastorally speaking, it kind of gives us all a fresh start, a unified, overarching structure that is not defined by any one of the parishes, but instead by joining them all together into a familial, canonical, and juridic unity. So merger is what we're currently thinking. Doesn't mean that won't change over time, but that's currently what I think, just pastorally speaking, makes the most sense. So that's merger versus amalgamation. And then people have asked, well, why do we have to come into one canonical parish as opposed to just remaining as a family of parishes? I think the reason for that the biggest reason for that is it kind of defeats the entire administrative purpose of Beacons of Light. Like Beacons of Light, as I mentioned in my last video, kind of came about because of this realization that it's too much for pastors to be pastors of multiple parishes. And canon law actually acknowledges this too. So if you look at canon law, it says that a pastor should be pastor of only one parish. So there's this acknowledgement that it's probably best for the pastor to only have one parish. And so as a result of that, looking at what's administratively going to make the most sense, administratively, juridically speaking, it makes the most sense for canonical unity to exist, because that makes it easier for the pastor to manage, but also helps everybody else to have the mind of the pastor. If we're not just simply parishioners of parish A, and then these are the parishioners of parish C, everybody is encouraged more so in that situation to kind of think about it from simply their own perspectives, instead of looking at it as the pastor has to as a whole, as not just, and then also doesn't mean that he has to think about everything from this kind of aspect of, I got to look at this situation from parish A's perspective, and now let me take off that hat, put on another hat to look at it from parish C's perspective, and then put on another hat to look at it from parish B's perspective. So this allows the pastor, and then also the parishioners ultimately, to have kind of that unified mindset of, okay, we are members of this single canonical unity, which then helps us to view it from the same mindset as the pastor himself. So that's one thing there of why that is. And kind of put another way, a friend, family friend of mine stated before, give me, tell me to take over 4 companies with 4 separate locations, and I'll tell you you're nuts, and I won't do it. However, tell me to take over a single company with 4 locations, and that's totally manageable. Like, that happens all the time. And that's a much easier reality to manage. And so I think when we look at it from that perspective, it just makes a lot more sense to say, okay, canonical unity really makes sense from that perspective, and also just the perspective of unified body of Christ. So that's kind of listing that reason there. And then finally, parochial versus subsidiary churches. So people have had questions about what's the difference between the rights of a parochial church, rights of subsidiary church. And before I really jump into that kind of question, first I also want to address some people have claimed like, oh, this particular parish, I won't say which one, but I've heard just rumors that like this particular parish is definitely going to be the parochial church, and that's simply untrue. Like, we haven't had those discussions yet. I have nothing set in my mind of where I think the parochial church will be, as I think that that's like a question that that is kind of, I think going to be left more so to the discernment of time and just like people's input on that particular piece of information there. So I have no particular feeling on what that looks like moving forward. So just to be very clear about that. And then as we also look at just with parochial versus subsidiary church, so like what are the given rights of one versus the other? So parochial church becomes, the church that kind of is considered to have pride of praise now, and then with other subsidiary churches. And people in this have kind of raised the question of, well, like, so the parochial church has a right to the sacraments over the others. Yes and no, it has a pride of place, but to be very clear about what that means and how that practically plays out, I just want to use an example. Like, is that what it says in the law? Yes. Is there a reason for that? Yes, because the parochial church has this pride of place. Does that mean the other subsidiary churches cannot be used? Absolutely not. I mean, and in my opinion, this is just a fear tactic because I just want to share like a couple of stories of how this works in reality. So first, my internship parish in Cincinnati, within its parish boundaries, it had Mount St. Joe University in it. Mount St. Joe University has a chapel, and that chapel houses the Blessed Sacrament. So there's a tabernacle there, and there is the Blessed Sacrament present in the tabernacle. No one's ever questioned that. No pastor's ever said, you take that tabernacle out of there. So that's one piece. And then also during my year there, I think there was actually probably more weddings at the chapel than there was at the parish. And the pastor was never like, oh no, you can't have your wedding there because you met at Mount St. Joe University. You cannot have your wedding there. Like, that never happened. That just was not a reality that was ever enacted there. And even here in our own family of parishes, layman Catholic has a chapel with the baptismal font and the reservation of the Blessed Sacrament. Like, that all happens there, and Mass is celebrated there each week for the students, with priests rotating in and out. And I've never had the thought, no previous pastors ever had the thought of saying those rights are revoked, and if layman Catholic wants to have Mass, they have to come to Holy Angels. Like, none of us have ever thought that. So just to be very, very clear about how that works, like, is that what it says in the law? Yes. But practically speaking, has anyone ever been denied sacraments that they wanted at a chapel? I'm sure it has happened before, but practically speaking, in my experience, no one's ever challenged the right of someone to have sacraments in a subsidiary church. So I think that's part of it. And even if you want to go that route, like technically speaking with the canon law, I have a right to celebrate all the sacraments over vicars and deacons in the family. So if I wanted to, I could say, oh, you want this priest to do your funeral, or to do the baptism of your child, or to witness your marriage. Nope, I'm going to do it. Like, a pastor has a right to say that. I would not do that. So just to be very clear, I'm not saying I'm going to do that. I'm just saying that technically within the laws of the church, I have a right to do that, so to speak. And so, but I've never thought to myself, like, I'm going to exercise that right. And in fact, I'm quite grateful that that doesn't happen, because, I have a number of cousins and a number of friends that have gotten married at a parish right across state line in Indiana. And probably I've probably done like 8 to 10 weddings there, I believe, since I've been ordained a deacon, because I did a few weddings before I was a priest there, because of family and friends that have gotten married. And the bishop and the pastor of that parish has never said, nope, you can't do that. Like, again, I think just practically speaking, that's kind of like, that's never happened. I know I'm driving this point home, but I think it's really important to understand that the law says that, but the law says that for some extreme cases, to where I'm sure pastors have where priests have taken advantage of pastor's good gracious allowance for a priest to celebrate sacraments there, and he's had to exercise his right to the sacraments. But I'm saying that ultimately speaking, like practically speaking, that a parochial versus a subsidiary church, that is just one of those things of, yes, does it have a right to the sacraments of the others? Yes. Do I ever see that being practically exercised in any way? Absolutely not. And people have said, well, you say that, Father, but what about the next priest? Look, at this point, in 10 years, I'm going to be among the most experienced pastors in the archdiocese, older pastors in the archdiocese. And I don't know if you picked up anything about some of us younger priests, but we love the Eucharist, and so why would we ever remove the Blessed Sacrament from a well-used, well-attended church? That just doesn't make any sense from the way that, generation of priests that below me that I know think. So just throwing that out there. So just to say that, to make some things very, very clear. And then, so now finances. So when we get into finances, I think it's also important for us to realize here that, that finances. So people have asked, like, will there be separate books, separate account? No. So all the accounts would come into one. Now, that doesn't mean that there can't be earmarked funds. So I know different parishes have done it different ways, and can you keep like those accounts completely separate, or like not accounts separate, but can you keep like earmarked accounts for each parish to where we would kind of basically be doing the same thing we do now? You could, but I think that defeats the entire purpose. So that, absolutely not. However, could there be an earmarked fund, let's say, for we want to do a building project of some sort at one of the churches, and so we have an earmarked fund that goes directly to, for example, looking at putting a roof, new roof on at St. Peter and Paul. We have an earmarked fund that you can give only to that, and that money cannot be touched except to put the roof on the church. Absolutely. Could we do that for maintenance? We could. Now, do I think that's necessarily going to be, so again, like, could we do those kind of things? Absolutely. Is that we're going to do all those things? I don't know. Like, we're not there yet, and those are discussions I'll have to have with finance committees and with other people and other pastors who are already in the process of bringing together finances. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot from their example of, okay, what works best in these situations to kind of figure those out better for ourselves. So, I hope that kind of explains. One account, can we have earmarked accounts within that account? Absolutely. Or earmarked kind of sections of that account? Yes, absolutely. That can happen. What will those be? We're not for sure yet on what that'll look like, but I think to have everything just completely separated kind of defeats the entire purpose and would be just an absolute nightmare. So just to be very clear about all of that. So so I think that's it. So I hope that kind of gives some explanation onto those different aspects of what happens after a canonical merger. And then maybe some point in January or February, I'll make kind of a video that kind of talks more about the vision or like where we're going kind of thing. But when to make these ones, just because I know a lot of people have had questions related to canons and how do we get here, or canon law and how do we get here and all those kind of things. So with all of that, I hope that each and every one of you have a great day. And again, just covering all those things. So hope each and every one of you have a wonderful day, and may God bless you and your families.